This is Richard Linklater's Before Trilogy. It's the Criterion Collection edition that has 3 movies in it, 3 before movies. Before Sunrise, Before Sunset, Before Midnight. Each of these movies, as you might know, were made 9 years apart, meaning that there are 3 movies made in 18 years. And you probably know each of these movies has the same pair of actors, Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy. They play a couple who has a relationship that spans those 18 years. Now, to me, the Before Trilogy is among the greatest trilogies, one of the greatest feats of modern filmmaking, and that's not just because of the feat achieved in it, to be able to film 3 movies over 18 years and watch these characters grow up and change and develop, and have Hawke and Delpy show up for all 3 movies, having aged 9 years apart. The movie is a deeply profound meditation on modern romance, modern love between a couple, and what it's like to be an individual in a relationship that is a unity or a bond, or you think it's supposed to be. I mean, the question of what is love has vexed pretty much everybody ever. And then to try to take a stab at it on film, most films fail, or they're maudlin or sentimental, because they fall into romantic comedy traps. And yet here you have 3 movies, which each individually and then combined are pretty profound in bringing in the elements of romantic comedy, but then bringing in those realistic elements of you knowing that the actors are maintained and they're growing up and you're watching them age. And there are no makeup gimmicks, there are no movie tricks to make these characters look like they're aging. In most movies, of course, they're going to put on makeup, they're going to get costumes that make them look like they've aged. But no, Linklater's film experiments actually have these characters age, and that's realistic. So the movie is in one part romantical. It's the Romeo and Juliet love story, this, fantastical, larger-than-life, 2 people fall in wild love and they need to be together and you want them to be together. But then it's realistic in the sense they have all these humdrum, ordinary person problems, the problems of aging, having kids, the problems of careers, for example, and you get all these elements mixed together in this movie in particular, whereas most romantic comedies are just magical. They take place in some other kind of romantic world. This trilogy feels like it's at once one foot in that world and once in our own world. That's what I just love about it. The simulation of love in it, and us getting to see these characters grow up is really remarkable. I want to give you a few things that hold this trilogy of movies together and what you should look for as you watch it and rewatch it. I highly recommend watching it, in fact, in the span of a week or 2 weeks. I actually watched all 3 movies in 3 days, which was a great film experience to watch them in order in 3 days, because then you see the overlaps and then you see the development, and what's in the first movie is echoed in the third movie, but also backwards. And so then you can see all the connections, and this is work, to me, is greater than the sum of its parts. Even though each individual movie is quite good and you can watch it as a standalone, it's so much better to see it as a whole piece. First thing to look for in these movies is communication and language. Each of these movies takes place in a different European setting. You've got Vienna, then you've got Paris in the second movie, and then Greece in the third movie.
Excuse me. Sprechen Sie English?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Do you speak German for a change?
What?
No, it was a joke.
Now, these characters, one's an American, the Jesse character, and the Celine character is French. So in only one movie is one character in his or her homeland. Jesse is always in Europe. You always have the American in Europe trope. And then Celine, 2 out of 3 movies, is not in her native area either. So the question of learning languages and knowing the languages. In the very first movie, Before Sunrise, the characters meet on a train. But do you know how they meet? It's a fantastic scene that resonates throughout the entire trilogy, which is that a couple on a train, and the movie leaves their words untranslated. They're speaking German and they're fighting. It's a middle-aged couple fighting. And because they're fighting, Celine gets up, walks down the hall of the train, and there she meets Jesse. So what instigates these 2 lovers coming together, these 2 lovers who have a deep relationship over 18 years, it's another middle-aged couple having a fight. Well, guess what happens? In Before Sunrise, you had this magical night in Vienna where the 2 lovers talk and get to know each other and they kiss several times. It's a wonderful, magical movie in that setting. Of course, if you're middle-aged like me, you're looking at it and going, yeah, this is kind of a fantasy. I enjoy it, but it's not necessarily realistic, although it has realistic elements. But that middle-aged couple initiating things, arguing, and perhaps having a breakdown in their marriage is where Jesse and Celine are headed in the third movie, Before Midnight. Now, did Richard Linklater and others know that when they made Before Sunrise? Probably not. But as they developed the trilogy, they saw the connections, saw how to make connections to the first movie when they got to the third movie, where Jesse and Celine are middle-aged like me, and they've had several years of marriage, they have kids, they have careers, they have a lot of different wants and desires that are at odds with each other. And so then they have a pretty big fight in Before Midnight, and they become these magical Romeo and Juliet lovers in the first movie, like the couple who initiated their love in the third movie. And then, of course, there's the language question where they do speak in English, and that's partly because Jesse knows almost no French. Now, in the first movie, he actually tells her that he took a lot of French in high school but doesn't remember any, and then he should be able to talk in her language, but he can't.
I took French for 4 years in high school. When I first got to Paris, I stood in line at the metro station. I was practicing. And I look at this woman, and my mind goes completely blank. And I start saying, listen, I need a ticket to get to, So, anyway.
By the second movie, he's talking in French a little bit. How much are they going to communicate? How much do their languages overlap? And we're not just talking words, we're talking about body movements, thoughts, desires, all the ways to communicate, including Jesse's own writing. Of course, he's a writer, he's a novelist, and one of the reasons they get together in the second movie is because he's written a novel based on their meeting from Before Sunrise. The first movie, he's fictionalized his real life, and so then they get together because of his writing. It's kind of communicated to her to meet up.
Did you have a chance to read it?
Yes, I was really, really surprised, as you can imagine. I mean, I had to read it twice, actually.
Yeah?
And yet, sometimes they can't come together and communicate at all. So sometimes they're like that couple in the train. And Jesse's inability to speak French, I think, is pretty telling in the first movie. It's trying to say there are vast differences between these two who are, again, as I said, trying to form a bond, the love bond, and yet they remain separate individuals in a sense. In the first two movies, of course, they are film experiments because you only see two characters really. In Before Sunrise, it's all Jesse and Celine. Great film experiment because there's no other third character here. There's other actors in the scenes, but they're doing nothing, or they're not becoming minor characters, adding to the plot, adding tension and so on. So the second movie, Before Sunset, is more or less the same thing. So those first two movies are really tightly focused on two people to an extreme. That's one of Richard Linklater's film experiments. But by the third movie, we're bringing in more people. We have a son, Jesse's son. We have their twins who show up. Jesse and Celine have had twin girls. And then all the Greek friends that they've made on the island come in. And by the point, I think, is that in middle age, you have more and more people in your lives maybe coming between you, or maybe help forming a bond between you. You'll note these shots from Before Midnight, the third movie, where the twins are between them. Does that mean the twins having kids separates the lovers and the kids come between the lovers? Or the kids help bond the lovers because the kids are the glue that keeps them together? I think both. I think both are there. And the same thing for the Greek friends as we see them during the party scene and the lunch that they have and so on. There's a lot of talking with other minor characters in the third movie, so you get a lot more people involved. I do think that's a development, in fact, of the Romeo and Juliet romantical relationship. These two lovers who can only be obsessed over each other. It's not necessarily a good thing. It doesn't last full time, and it shouldn't. You shouldn't just be Adam and Eve in a tropical paradise by yourselves forever. You need other people. You need society. You need friends. You need family. You need other kinds of groups that you're a part of, and that's what comes in the third movie, Middle Age, which I think is healthy for Celine and Jesse, who end up being, the focus on in the second part of that film. Here's another thing to look for. Notice that these characters are types, and they think of themselves as types. Now, what's a type? It's when an individual fits into a larger category. So Jesse, for example, is a man. Jesse is an American. Jesse is a romantic poet of sorts. He becomes a novelist, obviously.
Yeah, I get it. So I'm the crude, dumb, vulgar American who doesn't speak any other languages, who has no culture, right?
Talking seriously here. I mean, I always feel this pressure of being a strong and independent icon of womanhood and not making look like my whole life is revolving around some guy. But loving someone and being loved means so much to me.
As an American male meeting a French female, they are keenly aware of these broader categories they fit into, and they always talk about, in each of the movies, and they're self-reflective on this, how much of a type they are, and they see each other sometimes as that, versus how much of a unique individual they are. So one of the questions in a relationship is, you're married, yes, to a man or a woman, but you're really married to a particular individual. So how much are you married to a general category of person? My wife is an American. She fits a number of personality categories. She has certain backgrounds. How much do I judge her based on those versus her actions as an individual? That shows up in pretty much every conversation, and it's very easy to start fights that way. Oh, you're a woman, you feel oppressed, but you're not. That comes up in the third movie when they have fights about whose career is most important. In the first movie, they'll talk about Jessie as an American, and Céline talks about her as being the French bimbo who Jesse's going to have this sort of relationship that's a trope with. He's the American who's going to hook up with the hot French chick and go back to talk to his friends. And she's actually thinking about herself as a stereotype or a type that's going to play a role in Jesse's life, but she's only a little speed bump in the hero's journey, as it were, for him. And yet he's got to acknowledge that actually what he is her, that they need to be together. And they don't figure that out in the first movie, but they do in the second movie, although with some interesting moral questions with Jesse being already married. That brings me to a general observation. The movie is partly about Céline as a European in Europe, but being French in Austria, France, and then Greece, and what that means. And then as a woman, a working woman in the modern world, but she's had, in the third movie, children, twins, which is, I've had twins, very difficult to raise twins as babies up through 5 years old at least. Takes a lot of labor, so she has had to sacrifice some of her career. And then she's had Jesse write about her through fiction, writing novels about their lives. Whereas Jesse is always playing the type of the American abroad, this Texan who has gone to Europe in 3 separate movies. And this is a very classic trope of, goes back to Henry James, and even before this, the American. What's an American in Europe? What's the difference between Europeans and Americans? Can Europeans and Americans blend, get along, or not? And here you have the possible bond of a French woman with an American man, but it's hard for them to get together, and that there's that spark. So he is the American who is poetic and romantic, but just downright American. As he says in the third movie, he's a man of simple pleasures. Question for these lovers is love just a spark of romance? Is love just a feeling that you have to maintain, and once it's gone, it's not there? Is it that spark or feeling you have to reignite? What is a bond when you have lovers? You have Jesse and Céline who seem to be able to communicate playfully about anything and everything. That happens immediately in the first movie before sunrise, and so they seem to be a fit because they're such natural friends, playful, witty, conversational in every possible way. And yet the question for this movie is that what a relationship bond is? Is that what love is? Is it a foundation of it, or is it just a part of it? How much is being a friend, really play into being a lover or not? It's a very interesting question. Should you marry your best friend, or should you marry that person who you feel the hots for, yet they're not really your friend and they're not conversational? All those kinds of questions come up for what love is. And then a bond. What's a long-lasting bond, and how do you get that to cement and then sort of never fall apart? In fact, become even tighter and better as life goes on, which is very difficult, as modern life is proved for most people. This is a rare moment in human history where most people are living a pretty long life, at least in, developed countries. So that means that our marital relationships are lasting longer than ever. But that's, of course, we have 50% divorce rates in America. So what is a bond that lasts? How do you develop it? How do you keep it? What's the foundation of it? These 3 movies are trying to answer or get at those questions. Not that you will get the answers, but you'll get visions of possible questions and answers around love and its bonds, which there's no other set of movies I think it does deals with these questions as well, probably as the Before trilogy. Now, there's a million more things to say about these movies, and I wonder what you think about them, why you watch them, why you might like them, what you found in them. Please let us know in the comments, and we could break down each of these movies individually, which would be fun, but I think I wanted to think about these movies together as a trilogy because they really do the great work of being a unity of three movies, just as Jesse and Celine are a unity, even though they're separate individuals, so these separate movies are a unity. Please subscribe to this channel for more great content. Thanks and have a great day.